Hello and welcome to another update. In this one I'll be covering the whole front line, but mostly focused on Bakhmut. But first off, I want to thank every one of you for 100,000 subscribers. We managed to hit it yesterday and it's a huge milestone for me, so thank you very much everyone for letting me hit this milestone. As for the front line, we see here starting out in the southern parts around Donetsk, we see that the Russian forces continue their attacks all the way from Uledar and north to the Krasnoyarivka area. As Russian forces continue their attempts at advancing in these areas, they are mainly focused around Krasnoyarivka and Bakhmutivka area in the direction of Novokalinove, as they manage to advance further by the railway. However, the rest of the front, there's also a lot of fighting ongoing continuously every day. As for the Crimean area, similar situation, fighting continues from Makeyevka all the way down to Svirne, as both sides attempt to advance and push out the opposing force in these areas, especially in the Serbryansky forest area, where there's a lot of close quarter combats, as both sides attempt to advance a few meters and kilometers every day. As for the Bakhmut front itself, fighting continues to the south and the north by Ivanivske, Vasilivka, the E40 highway. And as for the city itself, fighting continues to the northwest in the direction of Khomove, as the Russian forces attempt to take full control over the road and the village to cut off the northwestern supply line completely. And then fighting also continues here to the south, where the Russian forces have managed to capture the industrial faculty here to the southwest of the city. So this is actually very significant because this was a stronghold of the Ukrainian forces, and now they are actually neighbors to the Jehovah's Witness Center, which means that they now have to lock their doors, otherwise the Jehovah's Witness will come knocking. Then we see here to the southwest, fighting continues by the high-rise buildings, and there's actually a very interesting video of this part. So looking at this video here, we can see that this is the high-rise building area here to the southwest of the city, and we see that there are one patch of these high-rise buildings is falling after a controlled demolition. This is most likely done by Ukrainian forces to slow down the Wagner advance. They have done this in the northwest of the city, and they have done this to the east of the railway. So this is a tactic that they've been using recently to slow down the Russian forces, especially not knowing whether or not a building is booby-trapped will allow the Ukrainian forces to have an advantage, in the sense that the Russians don't know whether or not they can advance because of the danger of this type of trap springing on them. Following that, there is this short aftermath of the building exploding, as we can see here with this picture. Moving on, we can see that the fighting continues on the whole front line as Russian forces attempt to continue attacking in the direction of the high-rise building residential area, as they attempt to reach the borders of it and at the same time advance in the northwestern parts to cut off the Khomove supply road, as well as in the southwestern part where they're trying to completely cut off the roads here. They have managed to capture the industrial faculty, which will allow them to push westwards and essentially cut off all these smaller roads, which will cut off the supplies in the southwestern direction. And then at the same time, they will allow them to flank the Ukrainian positions here to the south. And at the same time, with the push northwest, they will be able to completely cut off all of the Ukrainian forces still within the high-rise residential area, which means that they are now in danger of being fully encircled from the very close tight fit. At the same time, I've expanded the gray zone to include all of these residential areas, as these are most likely being left behind by the Ukrainian forces as they continue to withdraw to these better fortified positions. However, here to the northwest, the Ukrainian forces are most likely still staying in the residential areas to hold back any Russian advances in this area to prevent a encirclement of the Ukrainian positions within the city. Then we see these two pictures. The first one shows a overhead view of the high-rise residential area within the city and the utter destruction that we see everywhere, including within the high-rise residential area. There is this major part here in the center, the school area and the industrial university area. We see that the Russian forces have bombarded these completely. Despite the heavy fortification of these buildings, the Russian forces simply have so much firepower that they're able to destroy it slowly but surely. And this second picture shows another part with high-rise residential buildings. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but it could be somewhere in this direction where there's some explosions and just completely demolished buildings. It is truly horrifying to watch. these pictures of the front line in Bakhmut. And then we have an update from Remy, which is my source from Bakhmut. He says it's still too early to talk about a withdrawal from Ukraine, but the signs are slowly growing that they are trying to get their last units out of the town. The industrial college was completely conquered today, which was also reported by Syriac Maps and Deep State Map. Battles now take place for the control of the intersection, so this area right here, as we have been seeing for the past few weeks and months. Likewise, fighting is already taking place in the fortified high-rise area, so the area right here. The big garage cooperative is still fighting in the last buildings to the south of it. UA is slowly withdrawing completely from this area to the high-rise buildings in the northwest. Wagner is also putting a lot of pressure on. So there's the last few container areas, garage areas here to the south, where the fighting is still ongoing. However, to the northwest, fighting is also going on heavily. They will most likely try to hold some sort of defensive line here by these containers or whatever they are. It seems to be a slightly different form of defensive line, which the Ukrainian forces can use to hold a defensive line here to the west. So most likely the Ukrainian forces will establish a defensive line by these buildings here. And at the same time, they'll be withdrawing to the residential high-rise buildings. So essentially, we will be seeing a defensive line that looks a bit like this, as they try to hold back and defend the last supply lines in and out of the city, as well as hold the town for as long as they can. Then he continues with saying, artillery work hard all evening today at the positions of Ukraine in Romovo and Ivanivske. One might think a breakthrough in this area is being prepared. So that would be Romovo right here and Ivanivske. So he says there's heavy shelling in these two areas. So this could actually mean that the Russian forces are attempting to storm these towns with their armored vehicles, which will allow them to overrun them. However, most likely that is not true, because we have not seen the Russians attempting such a maneuver. They could be in coordination with cutting off the Ukrainian forces here in the city, but that is not necessary, as the Russian forces are slowly advancing and taking control over the supply routes, which would be more than enough in this situation. All in all, the situation is getting worse for Ukraine, especially in the town of Bakhmut. They are now losing several territories every day and have to give up positions one by one. Wagner has a goal that will be achieved very soon. Wagner goes forward, the final push is coming. So that is his update. Essentially, he's saying that the Bakhmut area is on its last feet, as the Russian forces continuously push and bomb and shell their positions very harshly, and they are not slowing down, they're just increasing their momentum, trying to take full control as quick as possible, which would put some merit to military summaries theory that the Russians and the Ukrainians are aiming for the May 9th victory day, where the Ukrainians are attempting to hold it until that day for them to celebrate that, and then the Russians are trying to take it to celebrate the capture of Bakhmut on victory day. However, I do not believe that that is the case, as that is just symbolic politics. It could be something to do with politics of each internal region, as the war has been going on for over a year now. So they need some sort of victory to celebrate, especially since Bakhmut has been stuck for a long while now. However, there's nothing conclusive. Now, finally, there's this short update from War Monitor, where, according to Jens Stoltenberg, NATO allies and partners have given 1,550 armored vehicles and 230 tanks to Ukraine. So this is in relation to the upcoming offensive by the Ukrainian forces, and this is a normal number. This is at the very least what they need to conduct some sort of operation. It is said that the operation will take place with 12 brigades, totaling a number of 48,000 troops. This is not a large enough force to completely destroy the Russian forces and succeed in this operation. And I say that because, according to the US general in the European Command, Christopher Cavoli, he says that the Russian ground forces is bigger today than at the start of the war in Ukraine. So Russia has actually increased the amount of troops, the amount of tanks, the amount of airplanes, the amount of everything they have compared to at the start of the war. The power has increased, not decreased. In comparison, the Ukrainian army has also increased, yes. However, a force of 48,000 troops, if we have to take the rule of thumb, a 3-to-1 is what you need to launch an offensive. That is not very accurate, because according to Sun Tzu, the Art of War, it's actually 5-to-1. But let's give them a little credit. Let's say 3-to-1 because they are well trained or have high morale or whatever the pro-Ukrainian crowd says. If that is the case, then they are expecting the Russian forces defending the Zaporizhzhia front to be only 16,000 strong. If we look at military land deployment map, we can see that the Russian forces on the Zaporizhzhia front is very few, sparse, and far in between. So in that case, it would make sense. However, if we look at deep state maps map, we see that the Russian forces have multiple regiments, DPR, LPR forces, tank brigade, more Chechen forces, motor rifle brigade, motorized rifle division, motorized rifle regiment. These are most likely regiments of the motorized rifle division. So if we assume that this is the division, then there's a Wagner and Chechen forces included. This means that there's somewhere around 20 to 25,000 Russian troops, and most likely it is much, much more, because there's also the 58th Combined Arms Army on this whole front line, which means about 80,000 troops on the whole front line. There's no way there's only 25,000 by the Zaporizhzhia front and 55,000 by the Kherson-Dnipro front. So most likely we will see somewhere around 30 to 40,000 troops on the Zaporizhzhia front. And that is a very conservative number. With that, we can say it is slightly in favor of Ukraine or about equal, and the Ukrainians are going to launch an offensive. So that doesn't make any sense unless they have at the very least, double that amount of troops. Then this is not going to go anywhere. Despite the Western weaponry, because the Russian forces have weapons that can compare and do compare and are even better. Some weapons are even better than the Western weapons that have been donated. So this means that the Ukrainian forces only have the advantage when it comes to numbers, possibly. This is in a gray zone. It is information that we cannot verify on the Russian side. So there's no conclusions to be drawn. But in the end, the Ukrainians are doomed to fail this offensive if that is their only force, 48,000 troops. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.